Okay, part two, The Shoulder Shrug, featuring A Girl Made of Darkness, The Joy of Cigarettes, A Town Walker, Some Dead Letters, Hitler's Birthday, 100% Pure German Sweat, The Gates of Thievery, and A Book of Fire. A Girl Made of Darkness. Some statistical information. First stolen book, January 13, 1939. Second stolen book, April 20, 1940. Duration between said stolen books, 463 days. If you were being flippant about it, you'd say that all it took was a little bit of fire, really, and some human shouting to go with it. You'd say that was all Liesel Meminger needed to apprehend her second stolen book, even if it smoked in her hands, even if it lit her ribs. The problem, however, is this. There is no time to be flippant. It's no time to be half watching, turning around, or checking the stove, because when the book thief stole her second book, not only were there many factors involved in her hunger to do so, but the act of stealing it triggered the crux of what was to come. It would provide her with a venue for continued book thievery. It would inspire Hans Haberman to come up with a plan to help the Jewish fist fighter, and it would show me, once again, that one opportunity leads directly to another, just as risk leads to more risk, life to more life, and death to more death. In a way, it was destiny. You see, people may tell you that Nazi Germany was built on anti-Semitism, a somewhat overzealous leader and a nation of hate-fed bigots, but it would all have come to nothing had the Germans not loved one particular activity: to burn. The Germans loved to burn things: shops, synagogues, Reichstags, houses, personal items, slain people, and of course, books. They enjoyed a good book burning, all right, which gave people who were partial to books the opportunity to get their hands on certain publications that they otherwise wouldn't have. One person who was that way inclined, as we know, was a thin-boned girl named Liesel Meminger. She may have waited 463 days, but it was worth it. At the end of an afternoon that had contained much excitement, much beautiful evil, one blood-soaked ankle, and a slap from a trusted hand, Liesel Meminger attained her second success story, The Shoulder Shrug. It was a blue book with red writing engraved on the cover, and there was a small picture of a cuckoo bird under the title, also red. When she looked back, Liesel was not ashamed to have stolen it. On the contrary, it was pride that more resembled that small pool of felt something in her stomach, and it was anger and dark hatred that had fueled her desire to steal it. In fact, on April 20, the Führer's birthday, when she snatched that book from beneath a steaming heap of ashes, Liesel was a girl made of darkness. The question, of course, should be why? What was there to be angry about? What had happened in the past 4 or 5 months to culminate in such a feeling? In short, the answer traveled from Himmel Street to the Führer to the unfindable location of her real mother and back again. Like most misery, it started with apparent happiness. Okay, so our introduction into part 2 is it's telling us that part 2 will be about the journey of Liesel and her stealing her second book. She already stole one book, no? The Gravedigger's Handbook. And her second book that she's going to steal is The Shoulder Shrug. And she stole it because they were burning books, no? And Liesel stole it from the fire. And she stole it out of hate, kuno. She hated the Führer. She hated Hitler. And the whole of part 2 is going to be that journey, no? The journey of her from her first stolen book and her second stolen book, and why she hated Hitler, and why there was a book burning, and why she stole the book. So the whole of part 2 is going to be that journey, no, between her first stolen book, The Gravedigger's Handbook, and her second stolen book, The Shoulder Shrug. And Death again spoils us, tells us nga, she stole it from fire, she stole it because she hated Hitler, and now it's time for us to find out why, no? To discover why she hates Hitler now, on the day of his birthday, and why she was able to steal a book from fire. The joy of cigarettes. Toward the end of 1939, Liesel had settled into life in Malking pretty well. She still had nightmares about her brother and missed her mother, but there were comforts now too. She loved her papa, Hans Huberman, and even her foster mother, despite the abusages and verbal assaults. She loved and hated her best friend Rudy Steiner, which was perfectly normal, and she loved the fact that despite her failure in the classroom, her reading and writing were definitely improving and would soon be on the verge of something respectable. All of this resulted in at least some form of contentment and would soon be built upon to approach the concept of being happy. The keys to happiness: 1. Finishing the Gravedigger's Handbook. 2. Escaping the ire of Sister Maria. 3. Receiving 2 books for Christmas. December 17. She remembered the date well, as it was exactly a week before Christmas. As usual, her nightly nightmare interrupted her sleep, and she was woken by Hans Huberman. His hand held the sweaty fabric of her pajamas. "The train," he whispered. Liesel confirmed, the train. She gulped the air until she was ready, and they began reading from the 11th chapter of the Gravedigger's Handbook. Just past 3 o'clock, they finished it, and only the final chapter, Respecting the Graveyard, remained. Papa, his silver eyes swollen in their tiredness, and his face awash with whiskers, shut the book, and expected the leftovers of his sleep. He didn't get them. The light was out for barely a minute when Liesel spoke to him across the dark. "Papa?" He made only a noise, somewhere in his throat. "Are you awake, Papa?" "Ja." Up on one elbow. "Can we finish the book, please?" There was a long breath, the scratchery of hand on whiskers, and then the light. He opened the book and began. Chapter 12, Respecting the Graveyard. I love this scene. It's such a simple scene, no? Where it's 3 a.m. in the morning and they're almost done with the book, and Hans is very tired. Hans Huberman is so tired already, and Liesel kind of wakes him up and says, like, "Can we finish the book tonight?" And even though he's exhausted, he does finish the book with her. No, it's such a simple scene, but it's such a touching scene. And it's such a beautiful scene. No, it's a very quiet scene, but you just, I don't know, it's I love this scene that Hans Huberman, even though he was so sleepy, just got back up and finished this book with Liesel, no? They read through the early hours of morning, circling and writing the words she did not comprehend, and turning the pages toward daylight. A few times Papa nearly slept, succumbing to the itchy fatigue in his eyes and the wilting of his head. Liesel caught him out on each occasion, but she had neither the selflessness to allow him to sleep nor the hide to be offended. She was a girl with a mountain to climb. Eventually, as the darkness outside began to break up a little, they finished. The last passage looked like this. "We at the Bayern Cemetery Association hope that we have informed and entertained you in the workings, safety measures, and duties of grave digging. We wish you every success with your career in the funerary arts and hope this book has helped in some way." When the book closed, they shared a sideways glance. Papa spoke. "We made it, huh?" Liesel, half wrapped in blanket, studied the black book in her hand and its silver lettering. She nodded, dry-mouthed, and early morning hungry. It was one of those moments of perfect tiredness, of having conquered not only the work at hand, but the night who had blocked the way. Papa stretched with his fists closed and his eyes grinding shut, and it was a morning that didn't dare to be rainy. They each stood and walked to the kitchen, and through the fog and frost of the window, they were able to see the pink bars of light on the snowy banks of Himmel Street's rooftops. "Look at the colors," Papa said. "It's hard not to like a man who not only notices the colors, but speaks them." Liesel still held the book. She gripped it tighter as the snow turned orange. On one of the rooftops, she could see a small boy sitting, looking at the sky. His name was Werner, she mentioned. The words trotted out involuntarily. Papa said yes. They finished the Gravedigger's Handbook, and Liesel told her papa what the name of her little brother was. No, they were watching the sunrise, and then she saw another little boy on the roof, and it made her think of her little brother, and she shared with Hans what the name of her little brother was. His name was Werner, and Papa said yes. At school during that time, there had been no more reading tests, but as Liesel slowly gathered confidence, she did pick up a stray textbook before class one morning to see if she could read it without trouble. She could read every word, but she remained stranded at a much slower pace than that of her classmates. It's much easier, she realized, to be on the verge of something than to actually be it. This would still take time. One afternoon, she was tempted to steal a book from the class bookshelf, but frankly, the prospect of another corridor watching at the hands of Sister Maria was a powerful enough deterrent. On top of that, there was actually no real desire in her to take the books from school. It was most likely the intensity of her November failure that caused this lack of interest, but Liesel wasn't sure. She only knew that it was there. In class, she did not speak. She didn't so much as look the wrong way. As winter set in, she was no longer a victim of Sister Maria's frustrations, preferring to watch as others were marched out to the corridor and given their just rewards. The sound of another student struggling in the hallway was not particularly enjoyable, but the fact that it was someone else was, if not a true comfort, a relief. When school broke up briefly for German, okay? When school broke up briefly for Weihnachten, Liesel even afforded Sister Maria a Merry Christmas before going on her way. Knowing that the Hubermans were essentially broke, still paying off debts and paying rent quicker than the money could come in, she was not expecting a gift of any sort. Perhaps only some better food. To her surprise, on Christmas Eve, after sitting in church at midnight with Mama, Papa, Hans Jr., and Trudy, she came home to find something wrapped in newspaper under the Christmas tree. From St. Nicholas, Papa said, but the girl was not fooled. She hugged both her foster parents, with snow still laid across her shoulders. Unfurling the paper, she unwrapped 2 small books. The first one, Faust the Dog, was written by a man named Matthäus Ottelberg. All told, she would read that book 13 times. On Christmas Eve, she read the first 20 pages at the kitchen table, while Papa and Hans Jr. argued about a thing she did not understand, something called politics. Later, they read some more in bed, adhering to the tradition of circling the words she didn't know and writing them down. Faust the Dog also had pictures, lovely curves and ears and caricatures of a German shepherd with an obscene drooling problem and the ability to talk. The second book was called The Lighthouse and was written by a woman, Ingrid Rippenstein. That particular book was a little longer, so Liesel was able to get through it only 9 times, her pace increasing ever so slightly by the end of such prolific readings. It was a few days after Christmas that she asked a question regarding the books. They were eating in the kitchen, looking at the spoonfuls of pea soup entering Mama's mouth. She decided to shift her focus to Papa. There's something I need to ask. At first, there was nothing. And it was Mama, her mouth still half full. I just wanted to know how you found the money to buy my books. A short grin was smiled into Papa's spoon. You really want to know? Of course. From his pocket, Papa took what was left of his tobacco ration and began rolling a cigarette, at which Liesel became impatient. Are you going to tell me or not? Papa laughed. But I am telling you, child. He completed the production of 1 cigarette, flipped it on the table, and began on another, just like this. That was when Mama finished her soup with a clank, suppressed a cardboard burp, and answered for him. That sockerl, she said. You know what he did? He rolled up all of his filthy cigarettes, went to the market when it was in town, and traded them with some gypsy. 8 cigarettes per book. Papa shoved one to his mouth in triumph. He lit up and took in the smoke. Praise the Lord for cigarettes, huh, Mama? Mama only handed him one of her trademark looks of disgust, followed by the most common ration of her vocabulary, sockerl. Liesel swapped a customary wink with her papa and finished eating her soup. As always, one of her books was next to her. She could not deny that the answer to her question had been more than satisfactory. There were not many people who could say that their education had been paid for with cigarettes. Mama, on the other hand, said that if Hans Huberman was any good at all, he would trade some tobacco for the new dress she was in desperate need of or some better shoes. But no, she emptied the words out into the sink. When it comes to me, you'd rather smoke a whole ration, wouldn't you? Plus some of next door's. A few nights later, however, Hans Huberman came home with a box of eggs. Sorry, Mama, he placed them on the table. They were all out of shoes. Mama didn't complain. She even sang to herself while she cooked those eggs to the brink of burndom. It appeared that there was a great joy in cigarettes, and it was a happy time in the Huberman household. It ended a few weeks later. Oh, I love it. Hans is so nice. Like, the mom is like, what? He sold all of his cigarettes to get you those books, but he never gets me anything. I wanted a new pair of shoes. He didn't get it for me. I wanted a new dress. He didn't get it for me. But then he does buy her eggs, okay? And he said they were all out of shoes. And so the Huberman household is so joyful, no? But then Death says that, it ended a few weeks later. That happiness, ends a few weeks later. The Town Walker. The rot started with the washing and it rapidly increased. When Liesel accompanied Rosa Huberman on her deliveries across Malking, one of her customers, Ernst Vogel, informed them that he could no longer afford to have his washing and ironing done. The times, he excused himself. What can I say? They're getting harder. The war's making things tight. He looked at the girl. I'm sure you get an allowance for keeping the little one, don't you? To Liesel's dismay, Mama was speechless. An empty bag was at her side. Come on, Liesel. It was not said, it was pulled along rough-handed. Vogel called out from his front step. He was perhaps 5'9", and his greasy scraps of hair swung lifelessly across his forehead. I'm sorry, Frau Huberman. Liesel waved at him. He waved back. Mama castigated. Don't wave to that, she said. Now hurry up. That night, when Liesel had a bath, Mama scrubbed her especially hard, muttering the whole time about that Vogel sockerl and imitating him at 2-minute intervals. You must get an allowance for the girl, she berated Liesel's naked chest as she scrubbed away. You're not worth that much, Sommensch. You're not making me rich, you know. Liesel sat there and took it. Not more than a week after that particular incident, Rosa hauled her into the kitchen. Right, Liesel. She sat her down at the table. Since you spend half your time on the street playing soccer, you can make yourself useful out there, for a change. Liesel watched only her own hands. What is it, Mama? From now on, you're going to pick up and deliver the washing for me. Those rich people are less likely to fire us if you're the one standing in front of them. If they ask you where I am, tell them I'm sick, and look sad when you tell them. You're skinny and pale enough to get their pity. Herr Vogel didn't pity me. Well, her agitation was obvious. The others might, so don't argue. Yes, Mama. For a moment it appeared that her foster mother would comfort her or pat her on the shoulder. Good girl, Liesel, good girl, pat, pat, pat. She did no such thing. Instead, Rosa Huberman stood up, selected a wooden spoon, and held it under Liesel's nose. It was a necessity as far as she was concerned. When you're out on the street, you take the bag to each place and you bring it straight home. With the money, even though it's next to nothing. No going to Papa if he's actually working for once. No mucking around with that little sockerl Rudy Steiner. Straight home. Yes, Mama. And when you hold that bag, you hold it properly. You don't swing it, drop it, crease it, or throw it over your shoulder. Yes, Mama. Yes, Mama. Rosa Huberman was a great imitator and a fervent one. You'd better not, Sommensch. I'll find out if you do. You know that, don't you? Yes, Mama. Saying those two words was often the best way to survive, as was doing what she was told, and from there, Liesel walked the streets of Malking, from the poor end to the rich, picking up and delivering the washing. At first, it was a solitary job, which she never complained about. After all, the very first time she took the sack through town, she turned the corner onto Munich Street, looked both ways, and gave it one enormous swing, a whole revolution, and then checked the contents inside. Thankfully, there were no creases, no wrinkles, just a smile and a promise never to swing it again. Overall, Liesel enjoyed it. There was no share of the pay, but she was out of the house, and walking the streets without Mama was heaven in itself. No finger pointing or cursing, no people staring at them as she was sworn at for holding the bag wrong. Nothing but serenity. She came to like the people too. The Faffelhervers inspecting the clothes and saying, "Ja ja, sehr gut." Liesel imagined that they did everything twice. Gentle Helena Schmidt, handing the money over with an arthritic curl of the hand. The Weingartners, whose bent-whiskered cat always answered the door with him. Little Goebbels, that's what they called him, after Hitler's right-hand man. And Frau Hermann, the mayor's wife, standing fluffy-haired and shivery in her enormous cold-air doorway. Always silent, always alone, no words, not once. Sometimes Rudy came along. "How much money do you have there?" he asked one afternoon. It was nearly dark, and they were walking onto Himmel Street, past the shop. "You've heard about Frau Diller, haven't you? They say she's got candy hidden somewhere, and for the right price, don't even think about it." Liesel, as always, was gripping the money hard. "It's not so bad for you. You don't have to face my mama." Rudy shrugged. It was worth a try. In the middle of January, schoolwork turned its attention to letter writing. After learning the basics, each student was to write 2 letters, one to a friend, and one to somebody in another class. Liesel's letter from Rudy went like this. "Dear Staumensch, are you still as useless at soccer as you were the last time you played? I hope so. That means I can run past you again just like Jesse Owens at the Olympics." When Sister Maria found it, she asked him a question, very amiably. Sister Maria's offer, "Do you feel like visiting the corridor, Mr. Steiner?" Needless to say, Rudy answered in the negative, and the paper was torn up, and he started again. The second attempt was written to someone named Liesel, and inquired as to what her hobbies might be. At home, while completing a letter for homework, Liesel decided that writing to Rudy or some other sock girl was actually ridiculous. It meant nothing. As she wrote in the basement, she spoke over to Papa, who was repainting the wall again. Both he and the paint fumes turned around. Was whiz. Now this was the roughest form of German a person could speak, but it was spoken with an air of absolute pleasantness. "Yeah? What? Would I be able to write a letter to Mama?" A pause. "What do you want to write a letter to her for? You have to put up with her every day." Papa was schmelzing, a sly smile. "Isn't that bad enough?" "Not that, Mama," she swallowed. "Oh." Papa returned to the wall and continued painting. "Well, I guess so. You could send it to what's-her-name, the one who brought you here and visited those few times, from the Foster people." "Frau Heinrich." "That's right. Send it to her. Maybe she can send it on to your mother." Even at the time, he sounded unconvincing, as if he wasn't telling Liesel something. Word of her mother had also been tight-lipped on Frau Heinrich's brief visits. Instead of asking him what was wrong, Liesel began writing immediately, choosing to ignore the sense of foreboding that was quick to accumulate inside her. It took 3 hours and 6 drafts to perfect the letter, telling her mother all about Malking, her papa and his accordion, the strange but true ways of Rudy Steiner, and the exploits of Rosa Habermann. She also explained how proud she was that she could now read and write a little. The next day, she posted it at Frau Diller's with a stamp from the kitchen drawer, and she began to wait. The night she wrote the letter, she overheard a conversation between Hans and Rosa. "What's she doing writing to her mother?" Mama was saying. Her voice was surprisingly calm and caring. As you can imagine, this worried the girl a great deal. She'd have preferred to hear them arguing, Whispering adults hardly inspired confidence. She asked me, Papa answered, and I couldn't say no. How could I? Again with a whisper, she should just forget her. Who knows where she is? Who knows what they've done to her? In bed, Liesel hugged herself tight. She balled herself up. She thought of her mother and repeated Rosa Haberman's question. Where was she? What had they done to her? And once and for all, who in actual fact were they? Oh man. Dead letters. Flash forward to the basement, September 1943. A 14-year-old girl is writing in a small, dark-covered book. She is bony but strong and has seen many things. Papa sits with the accordion at his feet. He says, You know, Liesel, I nearly wrote you a reply and signed your mother's name. He scratches his leg, where the plaster used to be. But I couldn't. I couldn't bring myself. Several times through the remainder of January and the entirety of February 1940, when Liesel searched the mailbox for a reply to her letter, it clearly broke her foster father's heart. I'm sorry, he would tell her. Not today, huh? In hindsight, she saw that the whole exercise had been pointless. Had her mother been in a position to do so, she would have already made contact with the foster care people or directly with the girl or the Habermans. But there had been nothing. To lend insult to injury, in mid-February, Liesel was given a letter from another ironing customer, the Pfaffelhervers, from Heidstrasse. The pair of them stood with great tallness in the doorway, giving her a melancholic regard. For your mama, the man said, handing her the envelope. Tell her we're sorry. Tell her we're sorry. That was not a good night in the Haberman residence. Okay, so Liesel wrote a letter to her real mom, no, but she never got a reply. Meanwhile, so many of the customers of Rosa Haberman are firing her. No, they can't get their laundry done anymore because of the war. Because of the war, people are getting poorer, and so they do not have the money anymore to pay Rosa to do their laundry for them. That was not a good night in the Haberman residence. Even when Liesel retreated to the basement to write her fifth letter to her mother, all but the first one yet to be sent, she could hear Rosa swearing and carrying on about those Pfaffelherver and that lousy Ernst Vogel. Okay, that's a full thing in German. That's a full sentence in German that I cannot read. She heard her call out. Translation, they should all piss fire for a month, Liesel wrote. When her birthday came around, there was no gift. There was no gift because there was no money, and at the time, Papa was out of tobacco. I told you, Mama pointed a finger at him. I told you not to give her both books at Christmas. But no, did you listen? Of course not. I know, he turned quietly to the girl. I'm sorry, Liesel, we just can't afford it. Liesel didn't mind. She didn't whine or moan or stamp her feet. She simply swallowed the disappointment and decided on one calculated risk, a present from herself. She would gather all of the accrued letters to her mother, stuff them into one envelope, and use just a tiny portion of the washing and ironing money to mail it. Then, of course, she would take the Vatchen, most likely in the kitchen, and she would not make a sound. 3 days later, the plan came to fruition. Some of it's missing. Mama counted the money a fourth time, with Liesel over at the stove. It was warm there, and it cooked the fast flow of her blood. What happened, Liesel? She lied. They must have given me less than usual. Did you count it? She broke. I spent it, Mama. Okay, so Liesel continued writing letters to her mom, and she spent some of the laundry money in order to have it sent to her mom. I spent it, Mama. Rosa came closer. This was not a good sign. She was very close to the wooden spoons. You what? Before she could answer, the wooden spoon came down on Liesel Meminger's body like the gate of God. Red marks like footprints, and they burned. From the floor, when it was over, the girl actually looked up and explained. There was pulse and yellow light all together. Her eyes blinked. I mailed my letters. What came to her then was the dustiness of the floor, the feeling that her clothes were more next to her than on her, and the sudden realization that this would all be for nothing, that her mother would never write back, and she would never see her again. The reality of this gave her a second vachin. It stung her, and it did not stop for many minutes. Above her, Rosa appeared to be smudged, but she soon clarified as her cardboard face loomed closer. Dejected, she stood there in all her plumpness, holding the wooden spoon at her side like a club. She reached down and leaked a little. "I'm sorry, Liesel." Liesel knew her well enough to understand that it was not for the hiding. The red marks grew larger in patches on her skin as she lay there, in the dust and the dirt and the dim light. Her breathing calmed, and a stray yellow tear trickled down her face. She could feel herself against the floor, a forearm, a knee, an elbow, a cheek, a calf muscle. The floor was cold, especially against her cheek, but she was unable to move. She would never see her mother again. I love this scene. This scene, guys, ba? It's Rosa Haberman. No? Liesel spent some of the money. And Rosa is so mad, and she like spanks her with a wooden spoon. She beats Liesel with a wooden spoon, no? And Liesel, it hurts, but what hurts more is her realizing that her real mother is never going to reply. She's never gonna see her real mother again, no? And so the pain of the beating from Rosa, it's just like, it's so small compared to the pain of realizing that her real mother is never coming back, is never even gonna communicate with her anymore. So it's like physically painful, and it's also heartbreakingly painful as well. The floor was cold, especially against her cheek, but she was unable to move. She would never see her mother again. For nearly an hour she remained spread out under the kitchen table, till Papa came home and played the accordion. Only then did she sit up and start to recover. When she wrote about that night, she held no animosity towards Rosa Haberman at all, or toward her mother for that matter. To her, they were only victims of circumstance. The only thought that continually recurred was the yellow tear. Had it been dark, she realized that tear would have been black. But it was dark, she told herself. No matter how many times she tried to imagine that scene with the yellow light that she knew had been there, she had to struggle to visualize it. She was beaten in the dark, and she had remained there, on a cold, dark kitchen floor. Even Papa's music was the color of darkness. Even Papa's music. The strange thing was that she was vaguely comforted by the thought rather than distressed by it. The dark, the light. What was the difference? Nightmares had reinforced themselves in each as the book thief began to truly understand how things were and how they would always be. If nothing else, she could prepare herself. Perhaps that's why on the Fuhrer's birthday, when the answer to the question of her mother's suffering showed itself completely, she was able to react despite her perplexity and her rage. Liesel Memminger was ready. Happy birthday, Herr Hitler. Many happy returns. Okay? So we do know, guys, that the reason why, I'm sorry if you can hear the dog outside, no? She's a puppy and she's whining. Okay? It's annoying me too. I hope it isn't annoying you guys too much. Alright? But we do know that the reason why Liesel really hates Hitler so much is because he had something to do with her mother never being able to see her again. We do know that, no? That's really one of the reasons why she hates Hitler so much, because Hitler is somehow the reason why she's separated from her real mother. Okay, and again, her hatred for Hitler will be the reason why she's gonna steal her second book. Alright, so you can click on the next video to continue reading. No, we are still in part 2. We are halfway through part 2.